Hello, Sian. How are you today?
Hi Joe, I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Well, here we are at the end of the second day of the COP26 Conference of Parties, number 26, which is happening at the moment in Glasgow, or Glasgow, as Joe Biden calls it. How are you feeling about it so far?
Feels like quite a momentous time to be in the climate space, doesn't it? Like you look at the world media and kind of all eyes on Glasgow and all conversations about climate, really. I don't know if that's just our little echo chamber. There was a YouGov poll, actually. I have the YouGov app and they do daily questions. And their question today was how much in the past week, how many times have you had a conversation in person or remotely about climate change, the environment, or green issues? The majority, 40% of the UK, not at all. Only 8% said many times. A few times, 20%, once or twice, 29%. So potentially it's our echo chamber that all this buzz is happening and our news
Yeah.
feeds are full. But I feel strangely hopeful, which doesn't seem to be the attitude of the rest of our sector. But what about you? How are you feeling about it?
Well, it's interesting that you say about that YouGov poll. I mean, funny enough, I probably was feeling quite anxious, I suppose negative even last week. And I had a meeting about nothing to do with climate with a business colleague. And I said, been really busy getting ready for COP26. And she said, what's that? And I explained, it's about all the leaders in the world getting together, trying to solve the climate problem. She goes, oh, I've never heard of that. I'll have to look that up. And I immediately thought, oh my goodness, maybe it is completely our echo chamber. But on the other hand, I took my son to the dentist yesterday lunchtime, and it was on, the live broadcast was on in the waiting room, and people were watching it, and it was great just looking around the room seeing people watching it. So that gave me a bit more of a lift that people are genuinely interested, and as you say, the media are really covering it. So I suppose that did make me feel positive. But I have turned around a little bit from anxiety that it was going to be, as Greta says, all blah blah blah, to now feeling, yeah, exactly, now feeling a little bit more like at least the promises are being made, and they are, across the board fairly ambitious promises. There will be a bit of a momentum, won't there, as some of the big players, some of the big organizations and countries do say they're going to do things, it will pull the others in. So at the moment I'm feeling more positive. And I think Boris Johnson was similar in a way, because he seemed to start off feeling negative yesterday, apparently because the G20 hadn't felt that they had been ambitious enough, and now the leaders were getting together in Glasgow are being far more ambitious about what they're planning to do. So at the moment, I'm feeling okay about it all, actually.
That's good. I think we had an ethical hour chat last night, didn't we? And the general consensus seemed to be that it's not going to lead to much, not much is going to change. It's all talk, it's all empty promises, which I can totally appreciate why people are feeling that way. And, if you look back to previous COPs, some have been much more successful than others. Even if you look at the Paris Agreement, not a lot has actually happened when you dig into it. In terms of the timeline, it's great that we've got these targets, but actually not a lot has happened. I mean, we only got a net zero strategy in the UK the week before COP. And then when you look at that, there's big gaps in that. I really analysed that the other day, excuse me, to do an Instagram post about it and just kind of decipher it a little bit of, what are the government actually promising here? Because our government in particular are very, very good at PR and making themselves look like world leaders and everything and spinning everything in their favour. They're the masters of kind of PR and digital media in order to do that. But when you really get down to the meat of it, they're very popular, but there's not a lot of substance to it. So I really wanted to understand, right, what is the meat of this net zero strategy? And actually, when you look at it, there are big holes in it, as you might expect if you were feeling skeptical about it. But I'm still hopeful on that, because I think what it does is it gives people, industries in particular, it gives them the tool now to say, we want to be net zero, you want to be net zero, this is the help we need to do it. So this is where the gaps are. And it's when industry start leveraging and start pushing back and start lobbying that's when the change happens. So there's interesting stuff in there about the steel industry basically, and some gaps, but that is an industry now that can say, well, if you want to achieve that, you've set us this target, this is what you need to do to help us. And that's where the real change comes. And I kind of feel the same about COP26. I think it is going to be a lot of big promises, it is going to be a lot of media worthy headlines and things, but actually that gives us, the campaigners, the activists, the industries, the lobby groups, the NGOs, everybody else, something to use, to leverage, to get change to happen. Definitely. So I think the real work comes afterwards.
Yeah, and I think you're right. And I think it's interesting what you say about the measurement as well. So they want us to have, they want industries and organizations to meet targets, but then that has to be monitored to see how far people are going. I mean, I was quite surprised when the Paris Agreement, everyone said they were going to meet 1.5 degrees maximum, and now when they actually measured the commitments people have already made, it comes to 2.7. And if we did get to 2.7 degrees, I mean, we would lose so much biodiversity. There would be countries that were uninhabitable. You know, it would be a terrible situation. So I think that in a way that's given a wake-up call, hasn't it? Like, it's okay making these big promises, but you actually have to have the, you know, meat, I hate to say that as a vegetarian, the meat behind it to be able to check how you're doing and monitor that regularly and put that in place. And as you say, it's really important then that industry pushes back and says, well, if you really want us to do those things, then you have to give us leeway, money, whatever we need to do that.
Yeah, and I think the timeline thing is key. So obviously we know that the Paris Agreement isn't going to work in terms of achieving 1.5 degrees, 2 degrees. The targets we've set aren't ambitious enough. And we are now having to talk about adaptation because, you know, we've seen from the IPCC report, there are going to be, and there already are, significant impacts that are going to change large parts of the world. That's unavoidable. So it's very easy to be defeatist and just say, well, you know, it's not going to work. We've missed the boat. We should have acted 10 years ago, but we didn't. So we've got to act now, and we've got to do something. But I think what's important is to just recognise that actually this is a system change, and that does take time. And we are in that awkward position now of we haven't got time, but we need time. So we're trying to find the best way possible to do this as quickly as possible. One thing that's been interesting is obviously India yesterday pledged that they would be net zero by 2070, which is obviously 20 years too late, according to the IPCC. But the fact that they've pledged it is massive. Exactly. And I think there's a lot of backlash now, people saying that's too late, but there's not a lot of recognition that actually we, as in the global north, are responsible for their transition as well, because actually their emissions are our emissions, because we are going to hit our net zero target potentially, but we've outsourced all of our manufacturing to India and China and places in the global south. So actually we should be taking on responsibility for reducing their emissions as well. So what I would really like to see come out of COP26 for it to be a success for me is more ambitious targets, and is a recognition that actually this is a global problem. It doesn't just stop at borders, and we can't just say, well, we're doing this, what about China? And, you know, all of that narrative just has to end now. What do you want to see come out of COP, Jo? What do you think?
Well, very similar, really. I think recognition that climate is not just about temperature, and it's the knock-on effects on communities. And we know that women are far more affected by the effects of climate emergency. We know that Indigenous peoples are really strongly affected. So I think it's actually revisiting, in a way, the Sustainable Development Goals and seeing how climate fits in amongst that, because it kind of underpins everything if you haven't got a planet to live on, you know. So it's looking at the impacts of everything. I mean, definitely more ambitious goals than we have. I mean, what I like to say to people, it's like a speed limit. 1.5 is kind of the upper. We want to be lower than that if we can. You know, 2.7 is completely unacceptable. You know, it's got to be 1.5 or less. And I would like to see 1.5 and then with a future plan to bring things back down again, if it's actually possible to do that. I don't actually know if it is. And then, yes, definitely looking at, and we've been very much in the UK good at looking at ourselves very internally, and obviously leaving the EU's made us even more like that, and trying to put this narrative of being world leaders in things. I mean, one thing that, again, that's slightly grating is the messages coming out that, you know, we are the country hosting COP COP26. That doesn't give us any stronger role in it than anyone else. You know, we're not the leaders here, we don't run it, we're just basically having it in on our territory and being the you know, people actually running the day-to-day stuff on there. So you know, I think we've got to look at the bigger picture of how things actually are. It's not a UK we're the winners sort of thing. I was driving along last night and actually Boris Johnson's spokeswoman Allegra came on the radio, and she was really interesting, and it was interesting to hear her talk, but there's so many little sound bites there. There was, you know, let's keep 1.5 alive was the one that really stuck in my mind. And things, but it was very much Boris Johnson wants to save the world type of thing, you know.
Yeah, well, they're absolute masters at PR, and that's how PR works. But the dangerous thing is that gets into the media, and then the media influences public opinion, and public opinion is kind of, oh, we're taking care of it, we're world leaders. But actually, if you look at the data behind that claim, because obviously they can't just proclaim themselves to be world leaders, they have to have some sort of data behind that. But that's largely because we are one of the only countries with a net zero strategy. It's largely because we are making better progress than a lot of other countries on our emissions, but that's because we only count onshore emissions. And we haven't reduced them, we've just shipped them off to other countries and then ignored them. So
Greta Thunberg was
under the rug.
Greta Thunberg was pointing that exact thing out this morning. She was saying the UK is saying they're doing all of these things. I can't remember the numbers. We say we're 40% of the way there, or 44% of the way there, or something. And she's saying it's absolutely not true, because you're not counting manufacturing, you're not counting the rubbish that you're putting off, and all sorts of different issues. So yeah, no, it's really key that we are realistic. And again, it comes back to that measurement again, that collaboration. There's no point in having every single country reporting on something if the figures don't actually add up to the total that you want.
Exactly.
So let's talk about what's actually happened over the last 2 days, because it has been quite exciting. I was fairly glued to it in parts yesterday. So we had His Royal Highness Prince Charles, who was, I have to say, has come into his own a bit from being the guy that was considered to be the nutty guy who talked to trees a few years ago. He could have a fair few "I told you so" moments, I think, now. And then Sir David Attenborough. So it's been quite good from that point of view. But I also, I actually thought that Boris Johnson wasn't, how can I put this? He seemed to be taking it quite seriously, and he seemed to be believing it. And I have to give Alok Sharma quite a lot of the credit for that, because I think he has communicated the seriousness of the issues and the opportunities to him quite well. And obviously Joe Biden, he was stepping up. And when you've got the President of America putting his weight behind something, that gives it a lot of credibility as well. So that was great to see and Macron from France, the sort of serious people there. But there was also some really interesting talks from more developing nations. The Prime Minister of Barbados was interesting. Some of the representatives of Indigenous peoples talking about really heartfelt stories about what it's like for them. I remember listening to one where there was a lady saying how she'd seen children at the side of a dry river. They'd walked there for 12 miles to get a drink of water, and there was no water there, and they were just sitting there crying, you know. And it's
heartbreaking.
Good. Yeah, but it's so good to get, not good that they were crying, obviously, good to get that kind of image out there to these people in the audience, you know.
That's it. It's making it real, isn't it? And I think where we struggle is if it's not happening here on our doorstep, we struggle to relate to it, and we struggle to think that, you know, it's something that we need to do something about. So it definitely does help to make it real, and hopefully it's having that impact. I think it's really interesting, the narrative that's going on around Boris Johnson, and obviously he is a populist, so he's trying to make himself look like this world leader and whatever, but there's a really interesting narrative in the press at the moment about why has he only just kind of cottoned onto this. You know, he was a journalist before he was a politician, and, you know, he should have been on this for years and years. And he actually said he's had a realization in the last 2 years when he became prime minister and the scientists sat him down and explained to him the seriousness of it, was his light bulb moment. But I do feel like there's a bit of shame around that, and we're kind of saying, well, why haven't you done it earlier, and you should have been on this. But actually we need to embrace that, and we need to actually see that, you know, talking back to our echo chamber and kind of these narratives and these stories, you have to make it relevant to people where they are. And we talk about that all the time in terms of how do you communicate these things. But for us in our echo chamber, we are switched onto this. We've known about this for a long time. Our level of conversation about it is probably at a different point than people just coming in. actually we need to be catching everybody up, and we need to bring them up to speed, and we really need to make it relevant to the things that people care about, which isn't always the environment and nature and climate, because if that doesn't affect their day-to-day life, then that's not going to be their top priority. So I think it's really interesting to see how all of the media is treating this, because everybody is reporting on it, everybody is talking about it. And it'd be interesting once it dies down and there's another event and, you know, the news cycle moves on, it will be the same old in terms of who keeps that conversation going, and it will be back to the echo chambers. But this point in time, when it's across the board talking about everything, us as people in the echo chamber who want to engage people and want to get it out there, this is our opportunity now to make it relevant to everybody and to keep that conversation going. And I think we've got a really interesting opportunity to do that.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And also, as you and I have said before, it doesn't really matter what's gone before, not because what's gone before you is only important because of what you learn from it, you know, because you can't change it. So we have to take what it is, and everyone's on a different journey. It's the same with fashion products, whatever. Everyone's on a journey, and if you can't speak to them where they are on that journey, then you're never going to get anywhere. So it's really important that we accept where Boris Johnson is, where Alok Sharma is, where Joe Biden is, and everybody else. And it must be frustrating for the people coming from you know, Pacific Islands that are only 2 meters out of the water and having to sort of say, look, we're going to lose our land. But at the same time, they have to communicate that in a way that it means something to them, that they can relate to this. That's really important. Another thing that I thought Boris Johnson was very clear about was needing money. You know, it's really important to have money, and having to have private sector money fed into this. And you know, one thing about the Tories is that they can access finance. And hopefully they'll be able, if they really are truly bought into it, they'll be able to communicate that to their donors and how important that is. That gave me a bit of positive vibe as well, actually.
I think tomorrow is going to be the key day, because tomorrow is the finance day. So Rishi Sunak is going to do his speech. Mark Carney, who obviously former Bank of England and is now former governor of the Bank of England, now a special envoy for the UN. He has specifically said multiple times that businesses that don't address sustainability will not exist in the future. So he's very, very bought into this, and is, you know, now making it the rest of his life's work. So it will be really interesting to hear him speak. And obviously we've had pledges already from a lot of kind of big economies, big polluters, about how much they are going to give other countries to, you know, vulnerable countries to adapt and to decarbonize, but none of that has started. None of that money is flowing yet. So I think that's the key, because if you come back to the India issue, and obviously India is an example, but it also applies to other countries where most of their emissions are ours, and we have caused this. And even countries with very, very few emissions, but that are really, really vulnerable, you know, the Pacific Islands and things, they are the ones that are going to feel the effect of the damage we have done. So we need to be protecting them. It's our responsibility. And I think really, if the money isn't there and there aren't commitments there tomorrow, a lot of the rest of it kind of falls a bit flat for me.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. And yeah, going back to the developing countries thing that you were saying, I was reading some interesting stuff about, they were saying that I think that they need, I think it was $6 billion per year to try to alleviate some of the effects of climate emergency now. And of course, because of COVID, they already are in massive debt, and previously in lots of debt. So they're basically saying they need to have this money just to survive, you know. And we know the effects are going to be on migration and all economies. They can't grow the same things as they used to grow. There's going to be so many knock-on effects, and we're going to have to work as one planet really on this, aren't we?
Exactly. And I think that's the real key for me, and I hope that is the message that will come through as a result of COP, because I think the promises that are made, the pledges, the targets, all of that can be worked with. That COP is basically our foundation. We then take that and we leverage it. So one thing that I've been talking a lot about is encouraging people not to really burn themselves out by trying to follow it all, you know, because it is exhausting. There's so much information, you have to filter through all of it. We're all trying to do our jobs and everything else as well. So don't burn out in this 2 weeks, because actually the work comes afterwards, you know, the campaigning, the signing petitions, the getting the word out there, the lobbying, the politicians, everything that comes afterwards. But actually what we really, really need to see in the next 2 weeks is that mindset shift away from this is our border and this is our responsibility to we are one planet, we are one community, we need to make sure that we get through this by protecting everyone as much as possible. And hopefully we can just really learn the lessons from the pandemic, where we've done that well in some cases and we've done that really badly in other cases, and hopefully we can take that forward. I think if we get that mindset shift right, then the rest will fall into place.
And a good example of that actually is today's deforestation goal, where they've basically a number of different countries have agreed, including Brazil, which obviously has the lungs of the world, the Amazon rainforest within its borders. So they're saying that by 2030, they're going to stop deforestation. And obviously there's a huge knock-on effects in terms of their economy and loggers and all of that kind of thing, and big meat producing companies as well. So that's a really big deal. And to have Bolsonaro sign up to that, whether he, well, I don't be cynical whether it actually happens or not, but like you say, having the thing actually there makes a huge difference to happen. And also I think there's been another one today Joe Biden led on reducing methane production by 30%, which of course means that's actually was specifically mentioned in the IPCC report as the most damaging greenhouse gas. So but he didn't get, I think it was 3 countries, let me just look it up. I think Russia didn't agree to it, and China and one other. Hang on,
but that is massive, because methane is actually more potent than carbon dioxide. So the problem with carbon dioxide is how long it lasts. It stays in our atmosphere for thousands of years. Methane stays for hundreds, so comparatively shorter, but actually it's much more potent. So because we are now dealing with such short time frames, if we can address methane, it's going to make a massive difference. And I think that's the kind of balance that is difficult to strike at the moment, is the difference between the short term and the long term. Because obviously short term, pandemic aside, this is now number one on the global agenda, the biggest problem that we've got to solve. But we need to solve it in a way that doesn't destroy economies and livelihoods and everything else. And I know there's a big debate in our sector about the, rethinking how the economy works, and just everything, completely changing the system, because capitalism basically is the cause of the problem. That to me is a long-term problem that we need to solve. And I think the billionaires thing is a really good example of this, because you've got people like Jeff Bezos, who has got his Earth Fund now. He's stepped away from Amazon, he's set up his philanthropic Earth Fund, and he's going to save the planet apparently. And he's there at COP, and everybody's saying, well, why is he being given a voice? Why is he talking? But he holds power, and we can have a debate about whether that's right or not, and we can have a debate about how we change that system. But actually we've got a big problem on our hands, and we do need to work with him. And we'll get to that later, but let's solve this problem that's on our hands now, and then change the system that caused the problem.
Well, I think that the system will change as we go along anyway. There will have to be necessary system changes, and like you say, with the mindset changes. And as for Bezos, he was saying earlier when he was interviewed that he got a lot of flack, like you were saying, about who went off into space, he spent all this money on this, and he was saying, well, yeah, but my realization point was when I looked back to Earth from space and I realized how fragile Earth was. So yeah, okay, that's not very many people are going to have that opportunity, but at least there was that realization that he needed to do something. At least he is putting some millions, billions behind actually doing something about this. And we need as many powerful voices and people to make this happen as we can. And he also made some pledges about Amazon the company is going to have fully electric vehicles, it's going to be fully renewable energy. So when you've got a massive company like that, whatever you think about them, the fact that they're making those kind of commitments will have a snowball effect on other businesses. And talking of businesses, I think businesses is a key thing here. We need to, from me trying to sell into businesses, I know this, that when it comes to trying to talk to businesses about making sustainability choices, they tend to take the easy way, the cheap option a lot of the time, and a lot of it is for spin. And that's not a general criticism. I think it is just the way that we do business now, that the bottom line matters so much. We need to be persuading them that it's not just about spin, it's not just about looking good. You actually genuinely need to do this, and everything is going to cost a fair bit more. You need to reevaluate how you do your procurement, and we shouldn't be doing things like for example, the two-facedness of things. I see it in the newspaper the other day. It was talking all about COP26 on the headlines, and scroll down and it was something about Ryanair are going to have up the number of flights, cheap flights they have this winter. And then you have Rishi Sunak in the budget saying that our short haul flights increase is a real goal for the winter kind of thing. You think, well, hang on, it's not joined up, and we need that for government, we need that from business. It's got to be joined up to this one agenda.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is the difficulty, isn't it? You have got pledges in the budget that don't align, and then he's going to COP tomorrow to present the plan, and it does undermine the message a little bit. But I think you have to step back from just the climate message and accept that the government's role is to manage all of society and all the different elements. So they can't just suddenly completely change the system in favor of climate if it would have a negative impact elsewhere. They do, there's the ideal scenario, which is that we do move away from this really exploitative system that we've built, but that is going to take time. And actually at the moment, part of the way to get things done is going to be to tax certain areas and do things, but they've got to manage everybody's priorities to keep everybody on board with this. So it does mean that sometimes there are compromises on policy, and where that gets difficult is that we haven't got the time to be compromising. But if we go all in on climate, absolutely, completely, 100%, it's going to have a knock-on effect and create problems in other areas. So it's finding that balance, which is really difficult. And it pains me to say that as someone that is like, we need to go all in on climate and fix it, but actually you've got to be realistic about it. And I think that's the key for me with COP, is that the targets that are set do need to be realistic. Don't pledge to be net zero in 5 years if you're definitely not going to do it, because if it's not a realistic target, everybody's just going to ignore it, the people that matter. So it is real. India seem to have set a target that is realistic for them. I haven't really dug into all of the information, but if they're saying 2070 is when we can realistically do it, that is their reality. We then need to go back and say, okay, that isn't good enough. Here's how we're going to help bring that date forward. And it is that global community. But if we don't have that realism to it at this point in time, it's just going to get ignored and swept under the carpet again, and we are out of time to keep doing that.
Yeah, I sort of agree with you, but not completely. I mean, I suppose I like to see, rather than realistic goals, ambitious goals, but they've got to be they can't be ridiculously out, we're going to solve it all by next year kind of thing. But I think I would like to see better alignment between day-to-day economic policy with the climate policy. And I think things like looking at how we invest in coal fields, for example, and having the short haul flights being subsidized and trains not being subsidized.
Don't get me wrong, I completely disagree with that as a move. And
I know,
but I'm against it. But what
I mean is they then, and maybe it's because Rishi Sunak is not on that journey in the right place as yet. Maybe it's that short term versus long term, because I think that's one challenge, is that especially for an in-power government that's voted in every 4 years, they're thinking about what's going to get them re-elected as well as saving the planet. And we don't know how many of the Tory voters are into climate emergency. I would imagine quite a lot, actually. So they need to be speaking the message that's going to get those voters as well. And at some point, even those voters will be saying, well, hang on, this doesn't make sense. These things aren't aligning. So we need economic alignment, definitely, and with companies and with leaders. But, I still think we need to be ambitious, but we need to accept that, like you say, that not everyone's in the same place yet. And
it's showing us the gaps, isn't it? So it's showing us, it's good that budget came out in the week before COP, because then everybody did go, hang on, that doesn't align with what we're doing next week. Whereas if that had come out at a different point in the year, maybe we, in our echo chamber we would have done, but other people wouldn't have made that link, and it wouldn't have been, in the media and things, that actually we've said we'll get to net zero, but we're making flying cheaper and easier. That doesn't align. So I think it's good to show those gaps, and what we need then is to turn that into momentum. I think where we struggle to do that is there's so many different issues that we all go into our own little pockets and shout about little issues, but actually we need to, big issues, but we don't get that cut through of message because we're all having separate conversations. So for me, what's going to be really, really important is that as a climate community, we then analyze what's come out of COP, we analyze the promises that have been made, we analyze where the gaps are, and we get on message and we work together to really push back and hold these leaders accountable, because they work for us.
And I think it is that low-hanging fruit thing as well, because we know it's urgent, really, really urgent. So maybe there are 5 topics that we go for straight away. You know, maybe it's air or ground source heat pumps and getting rid of fossil fuels within our homes. You know, maybe it's getting more people onto electric vehicles, or not driving at all, or driving very little. You know, maybe there's certain behaviour change things for the general public. And I would suggest, I mean, Boris Johnson got a lot of flack for taking a private jet up and down to Glasgow. That's, you know, something that's going to, it can go either way. Some people think, well, if he's not doing it, I shouldn't do it. But also it's good that there's you know, people noticing that kind of thing is happening, but it's not an excuse to not do something. And maybe he'll think about it again, you know, because the train to Scotland is lovely, so there's no reason why you wouldn't, you know, it's a luxury trip compared with, well, maybe not private jet, but there's probably some things. And then we want businesses as well to be focusing in on, maybe they're getting less merchandise. You know, I've been working with the NatWest Bank, as you know, and they're looking at how they can, you know, power their branches with renewable energy, how they can use different fixtures and fittings that are more sustainable, and all of that kind of thing. And we want businesses to be thinking along those lines as well.
Exactly. Yeah, and it is just a case of everybody coming together and doing these changes. And I think this is the foundation for that, isn't it? These next few days. So what's going to be some key points for you, Jo, that you're going to be looking at over the next few days? Finance is definitely one for me that I'm going to have my eye on, I think.
Yeah, I mean, looking at the agenda, because we've had the first 2 days now of the Leaders Summit, so that's been great hearing from everybody. But now for the rest of this week, we've got finance tomorrow, which will be interesting. Energy is going to be really key one on the Thursday, because that's obviously the global transition to clean energy. You've got countries like Australia with a huge reliance on coal and the export of coal as well, and then other countries relying on using fossil fuels. Then you've got the oil producing companies in the Middle East, and OPEC actually before COP26 were trying to lobby to have COP26 take out references to fossil fuels as dangerous for the environment. So that's going to be a really interesting one, energy, on Thursday. And then Friday is going to be youth and the public. So again, that's going to be crucial for us. What is the role of the public in this? What is the role of young people? Because young people, they know that it affects them probably far more than it affects us. You know, it's their future. And those of us who are parents and grandparents as well, you know, we know that it's really, really important to have public empowerment. So I think up until then, and then Saturday is about nature, which, you know, again, during the coronavirus, we all appreciated nature a huge amount. And there's a whole different section of things going on next week. They get a rest on Sunday.
Hopefully that means we get a rest too, because it's like, oh, keeping up with it all.
Sunday papers. But yeah, so I think I'm really interested in the energy one. I'm really interested in the youth empowerment one. I mean, one thing that President Macron was talking about, not Macron, sorry, the Italian Prime Minister, because they had the youth COP youth summit in Milan, I think it was, wasn't it? And that was really, I think that it sounded like that inspired him quite a lot, the young people's strength of voice. And then we've obviously got Greta Thunberg there as well, speaking out for the youth. So that's important. So yeah, finance, energy and youth for me.
Yeah, and I think the energy one is interesting, because when you read the net zero strategy, which obviously is UK only, but so much of it relies on technology that just doesn't exist yet or isn't proven to be feasible yet. And I think, again, it needs the finance to invest in it, but we're relying on generating new technologies within the next 10 years and getting them to the point where they're market ready. And I think that is a risky strategy. So yeah, it will be interesting to see what comes out of that. And I'm hoping we will see some real world actionable solutions, because they do exist. You know, we've got Project Drawdown, the 100 most feasible solutions that could be implemented now. So actually, I'm really hoping that those conversations will look at some of what we can already do and what already exists, as well as technology, because, you know, innovation is good and this will all help. But yeah, I think short term, we really need solutions now.
We do. I mean, some of the more practical things like reforestation and those kind of things, they've got long-term effects, but they're I wouldn't say simple, but they're understandable, aren't they? We know how to go about it. And I think those kind of solutions make a big difference, and they're not technological in the same way. We do need a bit of both, really, don't we? And improvements in the, I mean, looking at the UK in particular, most of us have a gas boiler of some sort, and the government have talked about making it easier for people, but it's not accessible to most people to change out their boiler, because you've got to change all your radiators, and yet it is the most sensible thing to happen. And we know we can, it's got to be made easy and attractive for people to do.
Exactly.
And the same with electric cars, isn't it? I mean, talking to friends and my parents, you know, they actually do have a hybrid car already. Actually, my parents are really quite good, but it was their concerns were all around, how do I charge it? How do I go on a journey? And for people who live in the country, or people who are older and more vulnerable, public transport isn't so much of an option, you know. So it's making these things work.
Yeah, and that's going to be the key, isn't it? And I think a lot of that will come after COP, but I think COP will give us the leverage we need to push for that.
No, well, it's been really exciting chatting to you about this. Will we do it again in a few days?
Yeah, we're going to have to. There's going to be so much to digest.
All eyes on 2 days in.
2 days in, exactly.
We should try and do it again at the end of the first week and see how we get on with that. And also, I'm going to be talking to some people who are actually up there, recording someone for the podcast, the Where Does It Come From podcast, who's actually up there. So it'll be really interesting to hear how that is on the ground as well. So so let's I'll post this onto our YouTube channel, and which is the Be the Change channel, and we can share it on social media. But you know, if people want us to discuss any particular things to do with COP26, then do just get in touch, and we will, because we both care about these issues really passionately, don't we?
Exactly. Make sure you subscribe to the channel to get notified when we do our next debrief of all things COP.
Yes, wonderful. Well, thanks for spending some time chatting, Sian.
Thanks, Jo. Pleasure as always. Put the world to rights.
That's what we like doing. We just need a bottle of wine, really.
Yeah, true.
Okay then, thank you.
Bye.